The morning air in Chicago was cold and sharp, slipping through the old windows of the historic Lakeside Conservatory. It mixed with the low squeak of mop wheels across tile as Carmen pushed her bucket through the empty halls of the main auditorium. She kept her head down, her body wrapped tight in layers to fight off the chill. Every morning started like this, cleaning the same floors while students hurried past, barely noticing her. She was part of the scenery, someone you walked around, not someone you spoke to. But this morning something shifted. A group of students hung back near the entrance, laughing too loudly for the hour. One of them, a guy no older than 17, spotted her near the dusty upright piano in the corner. "If you think you belong here," he said, raising his voice just enough, "prove it. Play something." The others chuckled, expecting a moment of shared superiority. Carmen didn't reply. She sat down, her hands shaking slightly as they hovered over the chipped keys. And then she played, not with polish, not with perfection, but with something real. The notes stumbled forward, raw and honest. The laughter faded. By the time she hit the last note, no one was laughing anymore. Over the next few days, quiet. Conversation started weaving through the halls of Lakeside Conservatory. "Did you hear about the janitor?" some whispered near the stairwell. "She played like a pro," others said in hushed tones by the lockers. Not everyone believed it. A few laughed it off like some bizarre rumor, but others swore it was true. Among them was Marcus, a young security guard who had been standing near the back hallway when the music floated out. He hadn't meant to linger, but something in the way Carmen played had stopped him cold. He didn't know much about classical music, but he knew feeling when he heard it, and he hadn't been able to shake what he felt that morning. A couple of days later, Marcus spotted Carmen wiping down the benches by the practice rooms. He walked over, a bit nervous but sure of what he wanted to say. "You have to show people," he said gently. "That music, it needs to be heard." Carmen only smiled, shy and quiet. "That stage isn't for people like me." She'd said it simply, like a fact, but Marcus wasn't giving up. A few mornings later, she found a folded pamphlet in her mailbox. A line was circled in red. "Sometimes greatness hides right in plain sight." It stirred something in her, familiar, like a new version of an old song. Carmen kept the pamphlet tucked inside her work bag for several days. Every time she reached for her keys or a snack, it was there, staring back at her. She couldn't help but read that one sentence, again and again. "Sometimes greatness hides right in plain sight." It rattled around in her head like a melody that refused to leave. In her younger days, she'd dreamed of playing real stages, of feeling lights on her face instead of fluorescent bulbs. But life had gone a different way, and she'd packed those dreams away like old sheet music. No degree, no fancy performances. To list, no photos in programs, just the music still living in her hands. One grey Sunday morning, Carmen boarded the train to Rogers Park, where they were holding sign-ups for the Midlake Music Showcase. She walked into the community center, still dressed in her usual jeans and hoodie, and noticed the sideways glances. She didn't let it shake her. Stepping up to the registration table, she filled out the form slowly, writing her name with quiet certainty. When she stepped outside, she paused on the sidewalk and took a deep breath. It was small, but it felt like something had shifted. Maybe this was how starting over began. The day of the audition arrived quicker than Carmen expected. She woke up before sunrise, pressed her best coat, a navy one that still carried a faint smell of bleach, no matter how many times it had been washed, and packed a small sandwich in case the day ran long. By the time she reached the Midlake Community Theatre, the line of participants had already started to form. Most of them were in formal clothes, hair perfectly styled, portfolios clutched in clean leather folders. Their conversations were filled with stories about recitals, conservatories, and masterclasses across the country. Carmen stayed silent, and took a seat in the furthest corner of the waiting area, hoping to stay invisible. But she didn't. Even though she kept her gaze low and her hands folded, people glanced her way. A few whispered. Her name was eventually called. Carmen stood, heart pounding, but feet steady. As she stepped onto the stage, one of the judges raised his eyebrows. Daniel, a name she hadn't heard in years. They'd taken classes together as teens. He leaned over and muttered something to the others before nodding toward a dusty, upright piano at the side. "Since you like forgotten things, play that one." Carmen didn't flinch. She walked straight to it, lifted the lid, and let herself breathe before pressing the first key. What happened next wasn't planned, not rehearsed, not written down. Carmen didn't follow a set piece. Her fingers moved on instinct, blending pieces of gospel her grandmother had sung in church with jazz progressions she used to hear through apartment walls. A hint of blues crept in, pulling old heartbreaks to the surface. It wasn't smooth or perfect. The piano's keys were slightly out of tune, the pedals a little stiff. Still, the instrument responded to her like an old friend being reminded of something it had almost forgotten. The room began to shift. People who had been distracted now leaned forward. The judges, who earlier had barely glanced at her form, sat upright. Daniel's smirk faded into something else, something softer. The music filled the stage, and then the space beyond it, reaching into everyone's quiet places. When the final note hung in the air, no one moved at first. Then someone stood, another followed. Applause built from the back, spreading with more heart than politeness. Among the judges, Ava Morgan, a retired pianist with 4 decades of experience, wiped her eyes without hiding it. Carmen gave a small nod, unsure what to do with that kind of attention, and quietly left the stage. In the lobby, Marcus finished uploading the video he'd recorded on his phone. Within hours, it would start moving faster than he or Carmen could ever imagine. In the weeks that followed, Carmen's performance reached far beyond the walls of the Midlake Community Theatre. The video Marcus recorded made its way from local music forums to national outlets. Comments flooded in from musicians, teachers, and people who had never touched a piano. Some called her the voice of the unnoticed. Others compared her feeling and soul to greats like Nina Simone and Thelonious Monk. Headlines asked, "Who is the woman who moved a room with a broken piano?" Faced with the growing buzz and a surprising amount of public pressure, the Lakeside Conservatory, where she still cleaned floors every day, issued a formal invitation. Carmen would return to the Midlake Music Showcase as an official finalist. It should have felt like a victory, but Carmen didn't let it change her rhythm just yet. She kept her routine, mop in hand at dawn, piano under her fingers by night. But something subtle had shifted. Students she used to pass without a glance now nodded or said hello. Some even asked questions. Professors who once ignored her started watching with quiet curiosity. One afternoon, a music faculty member asked if she might lead a few open sessions on improvisation. Nothing official, just a space for students who wanted to learn something different. Carmen said yes. Something new had started, and she could feel it. At first, Carmen wasn't sure she belonged at the front of a classroom. Standing in front of students, even casually, felt like stepping into someone else's role. She'd spent so many years in the background that the idea of teaching made her hands clammy. But the people who found their way to her didn't come looking for credentials. They weren't after degrees or shiny programs. They were curious, open, and craving something real. One afternoon, a girl named Tasha showed up early, carrying a spiral notebook and wearing headphones around her neck. She was only 10, but she walked in like she had something important to say. Without much small talk, Tasha opened the notebook and said, "You made me think maybe I can do this too." That he knocked something loose in Carmen. The words stayed with her for days. After that, the fear started fading. Carmen began writing music again, not to prove anything, but just to feel connected. Her sessions looked nothing like regular lessons. There were no scales to memorize or rigid practice goals, just shared stories, simple rhythms, and a lot of listening. When the kids played, the old piano creaked and echoed, but laughter often filled the room too. Music stopped being a performance. It became a place to belong. Behind the scenes, not everyone was rooting for Carmen. Daniel, the same judge who had smirked during her audition, started making quiet moves. He sent formal letters to the Lakeside Conservatory Board, raising questions about her qualifications. He pointed out that she didn't have a degree in music, hadn't studied under any certified program, and technically didn't meet the expectations for showcase finalists. A few of the older sponsors, the ones who had been backing the event for decades, added pressure. They didn't say her name directly, but phrases like protecting the event's standards started floating around in meetings. The board began to waver. Then Ava Morgan stepped forward. In a live-streamed interview, she said, "We keep looking for perfection, but Carmen reminds us that music is about truth. What she brings to the stage doesn't come from a diploma, it comes from living, and we need more of that." Her words caught fire. People wrote letters, students made videos, street musicians, music teachers, even high school choirs posted messages of support. A petition hit 10,000 signatures within a week. Pressed by the growing wave, the board didn't just confirm Carmen's spot in the showcase. They invited her to stay on as an artist in residence for the coming fall. One afternoon, while Carmen was locking up one of the practice rooms, she noticed Luis, one of the older maintenance guys, standing nearby with a mop in hand. He looked like he wanted to say something but was still working up the nerve. After a pause, he stepped closer and spoke in a quiet voice, the kind you use when sharing something personal. "I remember you," he said, "back when you used to sneak into that old rehearsal room on the 3rd floor. I'd be fixing a pipe or checking the boiler, and I'd hear you playing. I never told anyone. Figured they'd think I was making it up. But I knew then you were already music." Carmen wasn't sure what hit her harder, the memory of all those silent nights, or realizing someone had been listening all along. Something shifted in her after that conversation. She still wore the same navy uniform in the mornings, but now she walked through the halls with more ease. People noticed. Students mentioned her in their papers, and some professors quietly nodded in her direction. She wasn't just the cleaner who played piano anymore. She was proof. Proof that talent doesn't always knock on the front door, and that it can rise from any corner, even the ones people often overlook. Weeks after Carmen's role as artist in residence was official, she and Ava Morgan began spending more time together. They often crossed paths in the practice rooms, sharing coffee and quiet observations about what music could be beyond rules. One morning, after Carmen had finished a short improvisation that left the room silent, Ava sat beside her on the bench and whispered something that caught Carmen off guard. "You remind me of someone," she said. "My sister, her name was Elise, played beautifully, but she passed away before she ever got to play on a real stage." Ava paused, tapping a few notes gently, like finishing an old memory. "When I heard you that day, with that beat-up piano, I felt like she finally had her moment. That moment bent time a little for both of them. From then on, Ava began guiding Carmen differently, not like a professor correcting a student, but like someone passing on something delicate, something living. They put together a series of lessons that blended structure with freedom, scales beside storytelling, rhythm alongside memory. Students came from all departments, drawn by how the music felt personal, like it belonged to everyone. It was more than technique. It was how hearts, even ones no longer beating, still found ways to echo. One evening after class, as Carmen was packing up her things, Marcus lingered by the door. He shifted from foot to foot, like he had something to get off his chest. Finally, he said, "Hey, I need to tell you something." Carmen looked up, curious. "It was me," he continued. "I was the one who posted the video of your audition. I should have asked, and I'm sorry I didn't, but I thought people needed to hear you." She didn't speak right away. Then, without warning, she walked over and gave him a quiet, steady hug. "You gave me a chance I never would have asked for," she said, "and I'm glad you believed in me even when I didn't." That moment shifted everything between them. They started talking more, not just about music, but about life, where they'd come from, what they'd given. Up along the way, inspired by her journey, Marcus decided to pick up his old composition notebooks again. He began showing up at her sessions, often sitting in the back, just listening. Eventually, they started writing pieces together, small ones at first, raw and honest. Music made from quiet pain and slow healing. Every note was a shared truth, told not with perfection, but with heart. The night of the Lakeside Showcase final arrived, and the city's main concert hall buzzed with energy. The other finalists waited backstage, dressed in polished suits and gowns, rehearsing their usual routines. Carmen, though, wore the same wool coat she'd always had, the one with the frayed sleeves and the stitched-up pocket. She looked calm, almost like she had been here before, in another form, another life. When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage without sheet music, without a formal plan, just silence, then a slow breath. She sat at the grand piano, closed her eyes, and placed her fingers gently on the keys. What followed wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't composed weeks in advance or designed to impress. It was something else entirely, a flow of sound drawn from memory, moments of heartbreak, quiet victories, sleepless nights, laughter echoing through halls no one noticed her in before. Every note carried a piece of her story, stitched together without words. At first, the audience didn't know how to react. It was different. But soon, the room shifted. People leaned in. Some wiped tears. When she finished, there was a pause, then a standing ovation. For the first time, the judges awarded a prize not for perfection, but for truth. In the days following her win, Carmen's life turned upside down. News outlets called non-stop. People sent her letters from all over the country, and a major record label based in Los Angeles asked for a meeting. When she arrived, dressed simply and carrying her music journal, the executives greeted her with polite smiles and big promises. They offered her a contract worth several $1 million, complete with studio time, tours, and mainstream promotion. But there was a catch. Her music, they said gently, needed structure. Songs with clear hooks, shorter runtimes, something more radio-friendly. They even suggested a wardrobe change and hinted at possible collaborations with pop artists. Carmen took the paperwork home and stared at it for several nights, the pages left open on her kitchen table. It was everything she thought she wanted: validation, success, security. But something didn't sit right. Her music had never followed a script, and deep down she knew she couldn't start now. So she turned them down. In a live interview, she said, "I came from the edges. That's where my sound began, and that's where it belongs." Her choice sparked conversations everywhere. Independent artists shared her words, and slowly a new wave began. Music made without filters or formulas, just feeling. A few months later, the community auditorium at the University of Texas was filled with friends, families, and a mix of music students, from the well-known names to the first-timers. Near the front, a girl named Brianna sat nervously beside her mother, holding a crumpled program in her hand. She was only 13, but her piece was featured in that evening's recital, organized by the Austin Music Collective, a group trying to showcase new voices. When it was her turn, Brianna walked across the stage clutching her sheet music, sat down and played her heart out. Her hands shook a little at first, but halfway through the piece, something clicked. Her fingers moved with confidence, and the room fell quiet. At the end, she rushed backstage where Carmen waited with open arms. "Now I believe my music matters too," she whispered, beaming. Those words stayed with Carmen through the night. By the following week, she had launched something new, the Sound Circle, a free program for kids who, just like her, had been overlooked. Word spread fast. Soon, children from small towns and city neighborhoods signed up. The old halls of the conservatory changed. What once felt stiff and unreachable now echoed with bold notes, unexpected rhythms, and pure hope. As the Sound Circle grew, so did Carmen's presence at the Austin Music Collective. She was in the building almost every day, teaching, listening, helping students who'd never felt they belonged. But not everyone welcomed the change. One morning, a folded letter showed up in the faculty lounge. It had no name, just a typed message. Complaints about Carmen's so-called lack of credentials, a claim that the conservatory was lowering its standards. For a moment, it stung. Carmen had always known she wasn't the usual fit. No fancy degrees, no polished bio. Just a history of late-night gigs, second-hand instruments, and music that nobody asked for but some people needed. What she didn't expect was what happened next. Within days, a counter letter started making the rounds. It was written by a graduate student and quickly filled with dozens of names. Students, staff, even some older faculty. They called her work transformative, said she brought music alive in a way they hadn't seen before. The letter was posted publicly and spread fast. The board met. After weeks of discussion, they voted to change the rules. Impact now mattered as much as formal education. Carmen was offered a full-time position, not as a guest, but as part of the faculty, this time with her name on the office door. One afternoon, while helping organize the storage room next to the old rehearsal hall, Carmen pulled out a dusty box labeled Archives Early Competitions. Most of it was filled with faded programs and old sheet music, but near the bottom, tucked between two folders, she found a photo. It was her. Maybe 13, maybe 14, standing awkwardly near a piano, hair tied back, eyes wide with nerves. The back of the photo said, "Regional Youth Auditions Round 1. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it. She remembered that moment so clearly. The voice of the judge, quiet but firm, telling her she wasn't quite what they were looking for. She had walked away before the final round, unsure if she'd ever return. Now, more than 2 decades later, in the very building she once left behind, she finally saw all the pieces fall together. The photo didn't bring regret, just a strange relief. The story wasn't over. It had just taken a different path. That night, she started writing. The piece she created she called Unfinished. It wasn't meant for the stage or awards. It was a conversation with her younger self. The conservatory made it part of their core repertoire, a reminder that it's okay to begin again. Luis had returned to his studies with quiet determination, slipping into evening classes after working all day at the print shop. He mostly kept to himself, still carrying the habit of watching more than speaking, but Carmen noticed. One evening, over cold coffee in the staff room, he mentioned an idea he couldn't shake, something about people who observe the world, but aren't seen themselves. Carmen leaned in. "Let's write it," she said. They started meeting twice a week in an unused practice room, shuffling through old recordings and notes. The piece, which they named Vigil, came together slowly, shaped by shared memories and long silences. Luis brought in field sounds, subway brakes, footsteps in rain, the hum of city lights. Carmen wove melodies around them like threads. It was music for the invisible. Vigil premiered at the conservatory's fall program showcase. At first, the room didn't know what to make of it. Then came the pause, the breath, and finally, the applause. A week later, a national arts blog picked it up, calling it the most honest thing you'll hear this year. For the first time, Luis was seen as an artist, not just a student. Together, he and Carmen launched a new stream, listening composition, emotion and form, side by side, no one above the other. Earlier that year, Brianna had submitted one of her original pieces to the International Youth Music Exchange, held annually in Chicago. She didn't think much would come of it, just another long shot. But one afternoon, an email came through. She had been chosen to perform. Her mum screamed, and Carmen, when she heard, hugged her so tight the girl blushed. In front of an audience filled with young musicians from all over the world, Brianna stepped onto the stage with steady hands. Right before playing, she leaned into the mic and said, "This piece is for the person who taught me my notes matter. Thank you, Carmen." The room stayed quiet for a few seconds after the final note, as if it needed time to breathe. Then came the applause, and not just from Chicago. A clip of the moment made it online and spread fast. Carmen watched the live stream at home, alone, hands clasped in front of her mouth, eyes wet. It hit her then. She wasn't just a musician anymore. She was a thread tying her past to the present and passing it forward. The girl she was and the woman she became were now part of something bigger. The music had spoken where words never could. It had been almost exactly 1 year since. Carmen launched the Sound Circle and accepted her place on the conservatory's faculty. That spring, she received a letter inviting her to open the new season of the Texas State Arts Festival in Austin. This time, not as a guest or an afterthought, but as the featured artist, a tribute to everything she'd helped shift. As the lights dimmed in the university's main auditorium, the soft amber glow filtered through the stained glass panels, casting long shadows across the hardwood stage. Carmen stepped out slowly, heels tapping gently, heart steady. The crowd, filled with students, families, and folks who had followed her journey, fell silent. She sat at the grand piano, took a moment to breathe, then placed her fingers on the keys. The piece was called Belonging. No lyrics, no speech, just sound. But every note carried something. The late nights, the doubt, the pushback, the raw joy of making space for others. From invisible to recognized, from silence to song, it was all there. When she finished, the crowd rose. Not quickly, but with quiet care, as if saying thank you without words. Carmen, eyes full, stayed at the piano a moment longer, soaking it in. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was borrowing the stage. It was hers. The morning after the festival, Carmen made her usual walk through the east wing of the Austin Music Collective. In her arms, folded neatly, was her old janitor's uniform, the faded navy shirt and pants she used to wear during night shifts, long before anyone knew her name. She didn't wear it anymore, but she kept it close, a quiet reminder of where she came from and everything that had changed. Students waved as she passed, some calling out "Professor," while others stopped her to ask about arrangements or to share something they'd been working on. Few kids from the elementary program ran up right before their lesson, holding their scribbled sheet music, hoping she'd look it over. Carmen smiled, listened, and promised she'd check them that afternoon. Near the practice rooms, she paused at an old upright piano pushed to the side wall. Without planning to, she sat, letting her fingers fall into place. Simple chords, nothing fancy, but they filled the hallway with something warm and familiar. No one was recording, no spotlight aimed her way. It was just the sound and the space. Carmen had never been after recognition. All she wanted was to play. And by playing somehow, she had taught others how to truly listen.